Okay, it looks like I'm live. Hopefully everything looks all right. I'm trying the camera from a different angle this time. Yeah, looks okay. I still haven't gotten my live chat working for whatever reason, so that's not great. But and I'm still working out kinks with the new webcam. It's 1080p HD camera, and I guess my computer doesn't have quite the processing oomph for it, so the video is a little bit glitchy at times. My suggestion would be, if you're able to, would be to watch it on lower resolution. Maybe it won't be so glitchy. Sometimes my mouth moves at a different rate than my face, so it's kind of weird. But anyway, hopefully the audio at least comes out all right. So tonight, it's 9:34 on a Sabbath, a Friday night, and I just want to tell everybody happy Sabbath first off, and we'll just get into this. Tonight I'm talking about the Abomination of Desolation, and I've been kind of wanting to for a while, and I just haven't. I don't know why. I have some different views on what this is, and if anybody has watched any of these streams before, listened to any of the audio recordings I've done previously, I generally have views on some stuff that are different than the mainstream. So like I'm not going to waste time coming on and making a video talking just to repeat what everybody hears in the mainstream. So when I come on to do something like this, it's because I feel like I have a different take on something that might be a little bit unique. Hopefully there's actual genuine insight in this. Maybe there's not, but I feel like it's worth a look, because my take on prophecy is that and I've said this before, I feel like I'm beating a dead horse, but if we narrow our focus so much on specific things that we look for to happen, then we run the risk of missing things that actually do happen. So it's my belief that when we read prophecy, when we try to analyze it, that we are open to as many possible fulfillments as we can be, so that we don't miss anything. So this is an effort to do that tonight. If you haven't already watched them or listened to them, I've got similar thoughts about different things on the channel, talking about how long is the tribulation, is Rome really the beast, things like that. There's Revelation from outside the box, where I look at the middle chapters of Revelation. But tonight I just want to focus strictly on the Abomination of Desolation. This, in my mind, is the we'll know it when we see it type event. So like we have all these prognosticators, all these prophets in quotation marks out there writing books and doing DVDs and conferences, calculating when this is all going to start, based off Jubilee cycles and this, that, and the other, and how long Israel's been a nation since 1948. And if you have any interest in this topic, you probably come across all the different stuff, so I don't really need to rehash it here. But in any case, I think that we have some pretty deep flaws in our understanding of what's coming down, and I think that this is one of them. To me, when I read prophecy, the Abomination of Desolation seems to be the trigger event. This seems to be the one thing that when this happens, all those date counts that we were given in Daniel and Revelation, Yahweh gave them to us for a reason. They're needful information, but the whole thing is knowing when it starts. And I've spent countless hours over the past several years, doing charts, doing spreadsheets, you're looking at the calendars, trying to figure out, if it starts on this date and it goes this long, it will end here. And it's just an exercise in futility. I'll just resign myself to, we'll know it when we see it. But I do believe that when the Abomination of Desolation happens, that will be the starting point. And at that point, then we can start to flesh out those date counts and kind of get an idea of how it's going to go down, what's going to go next, et cetera, et cetera. So jumping in, I'm going to start, even though the Abomination of Desolation starts in the Old Testament, the Tanakh, and the book of Daniel, I'm going to start in the New Testament in the book of Matthew for context. I'm just going to start reading in Matthew 24. This is the famous Olivet Discourse, repeats itself in Mark and Luke with variations. I'll go through all of those for context, because I think we have to look at all three of those Gospels accounts in a synergistic type way, in order, because obviously if we believe that every word of the Bible it has meaning and is useful for us, then let's use them all together. It just makes sense to me. Okay, so Matthew chapter 24. Yahshua came out from the temple and was going away when his disciples came up to point out the temple buildings to him. And he said to them, "Do you not see all these things? Truly I say to you, not one stone here will be left upon another, which will not be torn down." So just a quick sidebar on that right off the bat. I'm already going on the sidebar. We have the Western Wall. We have the whole thing there, the Temple Mount complex, where the Dome of the Rock sits. The Jews go to pray at the wall. American presidents go to pray at the wall. And, Yahshua was clear here that not one stone will be left upon another. So if that is the actual residue of the temple, then we have basically two options in my mind if Yahshua is correct here. Either A, the fulfillment of this still hasn't happened because the stones are still standing, at least some of them, or B, that's not the temple. And B is the option that I go with. If you go online, you look at Don Esposito has some stuff on it. There are others that talk about the actual temple being in the city of David, south of where the current conventional wisdom says is the Temple Mount. That the actual Temple Mount, where all the events are happening now, is actually Fort Antonia to the north. Josephus writes about that. He writes about colonnades, connecting the two, and the connection to the Ophel and all these different things, which I won't get into. But in any case, if just a sidebar there. So he's talking about all the stones being torn down. So if we believe his word, then either that's not the temple or he's just giving a partial fulfillment here. Anyway, as he was sitting on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, "Tell us, when will these things happen? And what will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age?" So what are they asking? What's going to be the sign of your coming? And what's going to be the end of the age? Now, I come from a preterist background where we believed, and it's taught, that all this stuff that we're about to read here was fulfilled in 70 AD when the temple was destroyed and Jerusalem was destroyed. So did Yahshua come? Did he return at that point? No. Did the age end? No. And you have to understand, from a Jewish perspective, from a Hebraic perspective, this is who he's talking to. His disciples here were all Jews. They were brought up in Hebraic thinking. They were brought up with only the Tanakh, only the Old Testament as their scripture. They didn't have Paul's letters. They didn't have the Gospels. They didn't have Revelation. They had none of that. So from their context, when they talk about the age, they're talking about this present age that we're in, from creation in Genesis 1 up until what they call in Hebrew the Olam Haba, the world to come. So they know, they see it in the Bible. They see that there's going to be a destruction of this current world, this current age at some point in the future, and a renewal. So they're asking him, what's going to be the sign of this and what's going to be the sign of your coming? They're connecting the two concepts together, and they want to know, what are we supposed to look for? So since he's not here, and since we're still in that age, that can tell us right there that this has not been fulfilled, at least not fully. Now, some of this stuff I do think maybe had partial fulfillments, and I'll talk about that maybe as I go through this if I can remember. But anyway, to keep reading. And Yahshua said, this is verse 4, answered and said to them, "See to it that no one misleads you." Right off the bat. Kind of important. Don't be misled. "For many will come in my name, or my authority, saying, 'I am the Messiah, I am the Christ,' and will mislead many. You will be hearing of wars and rumors of war. See that you're not frightened, for these things must take place. But that is not yet the end. For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and in various places where there will be famines and earthquakes. But all these things are merely the beginning of birth pangs." Now, I know that I said at the beginning that this is, I'm going to focus on the Abomination of Desolation, but I'm finding myself wanting to discuss things as I read here. So forgive me, bear with me. I do want to emphasize in verse 5, "Many will come in my name," or my authority is actually how that would work, "saying, 'I am the Messiah, I am the Christ,' and will mislead many." Now, our English Bibles all have I am the Christ. I am the Messiah in quotations. So like I'm coming to you saying, I'm the Messiah. Okay, so, but let me ask you, okay, he's writing to believers. He's talking here to his followers. Presumably this message is going to be given to believers. Okay, so if I come along and say, I'm the Messiah, are you going to believe me? No. Like they didn't believe Bar Kokhba was the Messiah. They didn't believe, Rabbi Schneerson was the Messiah. Any of the so-called messiahs that were put out there, Christians never thought that they were the Messiah, because we have the Bible here that talks about these words here. So I think an alternate reading, knowing that the Greek that this was in, and there's evidence that there was a Hebrew version of Matthew. We don't have the texts anymore, but early ancient church fathers write about it. I think that he's talking about many will come in his authority saying he's the Messiah. Because if you take those quotations out, you can read it grammatically that way. I can come to you in his authority and say he's the Messiah and mislead you. That, I think, is a more accurate picture of what he's talking about. Now, we see that all the time. We put on TBN, we go to YouTube, we go to any of these Christian ministries, and they're all saying different things, but they're all claiming to have the authority of Christ. So if they all have the authority of Christ, and they're all speaking the truth, and they're all being filled with the Holy Spirit, and they have all this direct information, why is there so much conflicting information coming from the pulpits? I think that's what he's talking about here personally. People are being misled. And I'm not saying that people doing that necessarily are maliciously misleading, but it's a blind leading the blind situation. If you're lied to, you believe the lie, you spread that lie to the next person. You don't mean to. You're not being mean. You just are ignorant. And everybody gets misled. And I think that's what he's talking about here. And then he talks about wars, and nation will rise against nation, but that's not yet the end. So we've been seeing that happen for ages. I've read where World War I came, that people were convinced that was the end. World War II came, they were convinced it was the end. You had all these apocalyptic fears, the Cold War, this nuclear meltdown between Russia and America. Oh, that was going to be the end. You had all this stuff happening, and it still hasn't happened. So the end is not yet when you see these things. Let's not be misled, okay? Then in verse 9, then they will deliver you to tribulation and will kill you, and you'll be hated by all nations because of my name. At that time, many will fall away and will betray one another and hate one another. Many false prophets will arise and will mislead many. Kind of what I just read about earlier, or discussed earlier. Because lawlessness is increased, most people's love will grow cold. Lawlessness. If you look that up in the Greek, it's the word anomia. I harp on this a lot, I know, but it's very important. Anomia, without law. Christianity is without law. Their Christ, the one that they go to, and I identify it as a concept because I don't see Christianity following the actual Messiah in the scripture here, because he did not do away with the law. The Christian Messiah, Jesus Christ, apparently did. So it's a lawless religion. Okay, so because lawlessness is increased, most people's love will grow cold. You can read through the Torah. It's got two big commandments. What did Joshua say? What are the greatest commandments? And then he talks about love Yahweh, Elohim, with all your heart, soul, mind, spirit, and he talks about love your neighbor as yourself. He didn't just pull that out of his hat and just, this new thing that he was telling them on that day. He was quoting actual commandments from the Torah. You go back, I think they're in Deuteronomy. He's just quoting right out of the Torah, right out of the commandments that were given at Sinai. So it's not some new thing. Okay, the Torah, the Yahweh's commandments are given to teach us how to love Yahweh and how to love our fellow man. If you look at the 10 commandments, the first 4 show us basically high level what we need to do to show love to Yahweh, and the next 6 show us high level what we need to do to show love to our fellow man. The rest of the commandments are specific details under that umbrella that break it down even farther, because we're dumb sheep. We need more information. We need more details because it's not in us to love that agape love that he wants. So he gives us instructions to say, okay, let me show you how to do it. Let me make it clear for you guys how we're going to do this, how you show love. As a parent, you teach your children. You teach your children how to show kindness. You teach your children how to show respect, how to show dignity to each other and to their peers. It's no different. That's all he's trying to do with the Torah. So you take that away, and you're taking away the blueprint, the divine blueprint from the top to show that shows us how to love. You take it away. And then you end up with this thing where you have homosexuals that are going to the book of John and saying that God is love. And oh, well, that justifies homosexuality because, it's love. It's a completely bastardized version of that. And it's because they have no basis. They have no law. They are lawless. And it's a product of institutional Christianity. And if you're watching this at some point and you identify as a Christian, look, I'm not saying that anybody who identifies as a Christian is acting wickedly or anything like that in a purposeful type way. But I'm just saying that the system has lied to us. The system has misled us. The system has taken us off the path. If you read Psalm 119, it talks about just I can't even describe the lengths that David goes to in Psalm 119 to impress upon us the glory of Yahweh's commandments, the benefit to humanity by keeping them, and how liberating they are. They're not bondage. They're not bondage. They're if they are, then David was a liar. I mean, really. So let's face that we've been misled. We've been misled. This has been at least partially fulfilled, and I think it's going to be more fulfilled in the future. And I might get to that later if I feel led to. I might do it as a separate stream. I don't know yet, but just anyway, I'll table that for now. Okay. Verse 13. But the one who endures to the end, he will be saved. This good news, this gospel of the kingdom, shall be preached in the whole world as a testimony to all the nations, and then the end will come. And we know that this is one of the driving verses for Christians to go out and evangelize the world. They think that if we get every continent, if we get every city, every tribe, then Jesus will come. So when we say that, that puts the onus on us. We're out there trying to bring the kingdom ourselves. We're out there trying to do this, and he doesn't really. He just says it's going to happen. He doesn't really, command us to here. I know you have the Great Commission later, but that's, I think, misunderstood too. But I'll get to that maybe at some point later. Okay, so here's the meat and potatoes of this. Verse 15. Therefore, and of course, therefore just means because of everything I just said. So we have to understand what he just said before we can process this new information. Therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation, which was spoken of through Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place, let the reader understand, that's in parentheses, then those who are in Judea must flee to the mountains. Okay, so a technical note here, a better translation of abomination of desolation is actually abomination that causes desolation. That I don't see it annotated in this specific Bible, my NASB, but some of them have that as a footnote. And I know that scholars have put forth that as a better alternate reading, but everybody's just used to calling it the abomination of desolation, so I think most translators just go with that out of familiarity. But it's actually the abomination that causes desolation, and that's going to be a key concept to keep in mind as I go through this, because I think that's the major component of this that we're missing in our understanding, in my opinion. Okay, so he tells us he's referring us back to Daniel, so we'll get to that. We'll get to that later. But here's the key part: standing in the holy place. Okay, when you see the abomination that causes desolation, I'll say it correctly, which was spoken of through Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place. Now, he could have said temple. He could have said temple, but he didn't. He said holy place. So if we're open-minded Bereans about this, any place that's holy is a candidate. So off the top of my head, we know that the Temple Mount was holy, where the actual temple was. We know that Mount Sinai is holy. What did Yahweh tell Moses when he's the burning bush? Take your sandals off your feet. You're standing on holy ground. We know the plain of Jericho is holy because Joshua goes out to meet the angel of Yahweh, and the angel tells him, take your shoes off. You're on holy ground. Those are just some places that come to mind. There might be more. And I guess realistically, any place where the Ark of the Covenant rested could have some degree of holiness, where the tabernacle, the Mishkan, went around and rested, could have, because the glory of Yahweh descended there and contact earth, so that, that could be holy, but we don't know all of those specific locations. So I'm thinking of like big landmark type places that this could possibly be, and I could be missing some. But just something to understand, he's not saying temple, even though he could have. Okay. Then those who are in Judea must flee to the mountains. Now, historically, when you had the sacking of Jerusalem in 70 AD, there were believers in the area with these words fresh in their mind, and as actually, I think they were looking at the other two gospels too, which I'll get into that. But they actually took this literally. They fled into the mountains. They went out to Pella, and they established a community there. And I won't get into the history, but they established a branch of the early believers that persisted throughout the east there, that kept the Sabbath, that kept the feast days in some capacity. It kind of became corrupted as they went along, got further along. That tends to happen. But they had this core of they were keeping the commandments and they were keeping the testimony of Yahshua. But they fled. They heard his words. They didn't stick around for what was coming. But this isn't the ultimate fulfillment, because what did they ask him earlier? He's talking about your coming and the sign of the end of the age. So everything he's saying here is in the context of the very end. So even though, yes, they did benefit from interpreting these words as their time, which they apparently thought was the very end, it wasn't. So this is still coming. Okay? So whoever is on the housetop must not go down and get the things out that are in his house. Whoever is in the field must not turn back to get his cloak. But woe to those who are pregnant and to those who are nursing babies in those days. But pray that you're fleeing. You're getting out of Dodge here. Okay, things are about to go down. Be not in the winter or on a Sabbath. For then there will be a great tribulation, such as has not occurred since the beginning of the world until now, or ever will. Unless those days had been cut short, no life would have been saved. But for the sake of the elect, those days will be cut short. Then if anyone says to you, behold, here's the Messiah, or there he is, do not believe him. For false messiahs and false prophets will arise and will show great signs and wonders, so as to mislead, if possible, even the elect. Behold, I have told you in advance. So if they say to you, behold, he's in the wilderness, do not go out. Or, behold, he's in the inner rooms, do not believe them. For just as the lightning comes from the east and flashes even to the west, so will the coming of the Son of Man be. Wherever the corpse is, there the vultures will gather. So he's making it clear that if people are telling you, oh, Messiah's over, he's over there, come see him. No. And he's making it clear that this is going to be the worst time in human history, bar none. There will never be a time in history as bad as this. So I would think that on a big scale, World War I and World War II were much worse than what happened in Jerusalem in 70. So I don't think that 70 was the fulfillment of this. I really believe it's still coming. And, it's clear that we're talking about fleeing, which I'll get into when we get into the other Gospels. And verse 24, for false messiahs and false prophets will arise and will show great signs and wonders so as to mislead, if possible, even the elect. In my opinion, this is in direct reference to the events in Revelation with the beast and the false prophet. And when you look at the word anti-Messiah or antichrist, when you look at that Greek word anti, everybody has it in their minds that it means against or opposite. And it does sometimes, depending on the context. But it can also have the connotation of in place of. Okay? So, we know that the Pope claims to be the vicar of Christ. He claims to be the stand-in, Christ on earth or whatever, the theology is. That's basically what that means. So this is someone who is standing in the place of Christ, of Messiah. Okay? And false prophets. And they're going to show signs and wonders. That's what we read about in Revelation 13. The second beast, calling fire down from heaven, doing the signs and wonders. The whole purpose of all that is to solidify in everyone's mind the authority of beast, of the first beast, because he causes all the earth, to worship the first beast, who is getting his power from the dragon, from Satan. So the whole thing is like you have a prophet like John the Baptist. His whole mission was to bring attention to Yahshua and direct everybody to Yahshua. And if you're tuning in for the first time, I've in previous videos I've tried to say Yahshua and Jesus interchangeably for context. I'm just going to stop doing that. I'm just going to say Yahshua all the time. Hopefully, you know what that is by now. In any case, so I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to go to the next mention of the abomination that causes desolation. This is in Mark chapter 13. And again, I'm going to read the whole thing, the relevant parts for context. I want to really solidify in everybody's mind that we need to look at all three of these gospels together to get the big picture, okay? As he was going out of the temple, one of his disciples said to him, "Teacher, behold, what wonderful stones and what wonderful buildings." And Yahshua said to him, "Do you see these great buildings? Not one stone will be left upon another which will not be torn down." Addressed that earlier. As he was sitting on the Mount of Olives opposite the temple, Peter and James and John and Andrew were questioning him privately. "Tell us, when will these things be? And what will be the sign when all these things are about to be fulfilled?" And Yahshua began to say to them. So they're talking about just specifically when the buildings will be torn down. They're not mentioning the end of the age or his coming like in Matthew. And Yahshua began to say to them, "See to it that no one misleads you. Many will come in my name, or my authority, saying, 'I am he.'" And actually, in this, he is in italics, which means that in the Textus Receptus, actually, I think this was from the Westcott Hort, but in any case, the he was added there by the translators because it's not in the original text. It might be applied, but it's not there literally. So you could just say, "Many will come in my name saying, 'I am,' and will mislead many." That's a whole other context, because many will come in my name saying, "I am." Well, these are people coming in his name saying he's the Messiah. It makes perfect sense logically, because like I said earlier, you got all these, all these people coming around saying that they're the Messiah. Nobody's going to believe them. Like, no Christian is going to believe just any guy walking in and saying, hey guys, I'm Jesus, I'm the Messiah. Like, get out of here, dude. No. So we're talking about people who are saying he's the Messiah. That's much more palatable. You're gonna take that one. You're gonna accept that one. Okay. When you hear of wars and rumors of wars, do not be frightened. These things must take place, but that is not yet the end. For nation will rise up against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There will be earthquakes in various places. There will also be famines. These things are merely the beginning of the birth pangs. Okay, so if you've ever witnessed a labor, you know that it can go on quite a while. You start off with the Braxton Hicks contractions, and they just escalate. There's lulls, there's breaks. The woman can be going and just ramping up, and you think, oh, it's coming anytime, and then she just stops for hours, maybe a whole day sometimes, before it resumes. So if childbirth is the model of how this is going to look, then it's going to be steady progression, but it's going to escalate quickly once it really comes on. And I think that's why in the prophets he talks about the day of Yahweh coming up upon us as a snare. If you think about a bird in a snare, the bird just walks into the snare and bam, it's over. There's no forewarning, it's instant. So this is going to catch us all off guard, I think. Well, hopefully not all of us. It's going to catch most off guard. And I think it's because of what I said at the beginning of this. People are going to be looking for this idea of how they think it's going to go. They're going to miss it. They're going to miss the forest for the trees, basically. And so I'm just trying to get people to open their minds and look for a broader perspective on what could happen. And I'm freestyling here. I don't have any notes. I don't have any script. So bear with me. I'm not the greatest speaker, so I'm probably just saying ums and stuff periodically. I'll try not to, but I'm I'm just doing what I can here. Anyway, okay. Be on your guard, For they will deliver you to the courts, and you'll be flogged in the synagogues, and you'll stand before governors and kings for my sake as a testimony to them. The gospel, the good news, must first be preached to all the nations. When they arrest you and hand you over, do not worry beforehand about what you're to say, but say whatever is given to you in that hour. For it is not you who speak, but it's the Holy Spirit. Brother will betray brother to death, and a father his child, and children will rise up against parents and have them put to death. You'll be hated by all because of my name, but the one who endures to the end, he will be saved. But when you see the abomination that causes desolation standing where it should not be, let the reader understand. Then those who are in Judea must flee to the mountain. And then it's kind of a repeat of what he said in Matthew from there. But in Matthew, he said, when you see the abomination that causes desolation standing in the holy place, now he's saying where it should not be. Okay, so we're going to couple those two together and link them. There's going to be a place where something is done, whatever this abomination is, and it shouldn't be done there, and it's going to be a holy place. I think I might have a cricket in the house. So you could say that's the temple. The temple does fit that bill. Okay, if it's a legit temple, if it's legitimately holy, it fits the bill. But there's more to it. So let's go to Luke chapter 21. This is the third telling of this. And I'm not going to go over the beginning of it. I'm just going to skip right to verse 20 where it talks about the abomination. Now, it doesn't come out and say the abomination that caused desolation here, but if you look at the context, it's the same event. But when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then recognize that her desolation is near. Then those who are in Judea must flee to the mountains. Those who are in the midst of the city must leave, and those who are in the country must not enter the city, because these are days of vengeance, so that all things which are written will be fulfilled. Woe to those who are pregnant and to those who are nursing babies in those days, for there will be great distress upon the land and wrath to this people. They will fall by the edge of the sword and will be led captive to all the nations, and Jerusalem will be trampled underfoot by the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. Now, we know that Jerusalem was trampled underfoot back in 70. We know that the people were dispersed. So we could be looking at a partial fulfillment of this back then. But if we tie this back to the other two accounts, it's clearly an end times last days prophecy at its core. Okay, so that should be the core of our understanding. But the key to this is when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then recognize that her desolation is near. So when a city is surrounded by armies, it's for one purpose. It's a siege. We see this. Jerusalem was sieged multiple times. It was sieged by the Assyrians. It was sieged, obviously, by Nebuchadnezzar, the Romans later. And I don't know if the Greeks actually did a siege per se, but they did conquer the city. So Jerusalem has been hit by armies multiple times. It's no stranger to it. But he's talking about a siege here. So in the context of the other two Gospels, we've got the abomination that caused desolation is something. It's an abomination that's stood in the holy place where it should not be, and it causes Jerusalem to be surrounded by armies. Now, in order for Jerusalem to be surrounded by armies, the nations around Jerusalem are going to have to take some kind of offense by what's done here. It's a trigger event. Okay, so they're not just showing up to sing Kumbaya here. Let's all get along. They're showing up to destroy Jerusalem. So whatever this is something that causes the nations to come in and sack Jerusalem, or at least try to. And I think that that's kind of a big picture that we're missing, because everything that I've read and videos I've seen over the years, and then there have been a great many, the basic story that we're all familiar with is you have this 7-year peace treaty where the Antichrist makes this peace treaty with Israel. They rebuild the temple. Everything's rock and rolling. The Jews get the sacrifices going again. Everything's great. 3.5 years into it, he waltzes in there like the boss and does something to desecrate the temple, declares himself to be God, and then the tribulation begins, the Great Tribulation. Okay? But in that scenario, tell me, in that scenario, if the Antichrist is the ruler of the world at that point, and he has that kind of power, he walks into the temple and declares himself to be God, or whatever he does. Why would that trigger the armies of the world to surround Jerusalem and besiege it? You're going to tell me that the Antichrist, the boss of the world at this point, apparently, is in his headquarters, and the armies of the world, who he apparently controls, are going to surround the city and besiege it. That makes zero sense. That would be like King David, having the armies of Judah besiege Jerusalem while he's sitting on his throne in the city of David. It makes zero sense. So I do not believe that that's what we're to be looking for. But the thing is, that's what everybody teaches. Most of these prophecy teachers out there, most of the pastors, the seminary grads, you name it, the guys on TBN, all of them, this is the basic model that's out there. And what did Yahshua say? He said, don't be misled. Many are going to come in my name saying I'm the Messiah and will mislead many. You have all these people saying he's the Messiah, and they're misleading many. They got everybody focused on this third temple. And anybody that comes along, if Donald Trump comes along and he releases this peace plan that we've been waiting for forever, and it's a 7-year peace plan, oh, he's the Antichrist. Right away. Boom. Okay? Where's the deception? How are even the elect going to be deceived if it's that obvious? They thought that with Clinton. I think it was the Oslo Accords. That was a 7-year deal. And people were like, oh, he's the Antichrist. And of course, it didn't happen. So it's more to it than that. Okay? This abomination, whatever it is, that's set up in the holy place where it ought not to be, is something that's going to anger the nations and cause them to come around Jerusalem. Okay? So I think we've been looking in the wrong place on this whole third temple, guy waltzing in and doing the whole thing there. That's not going to trigger the world to come around Jerusalem. Now, the previous times when Jerusalem was sacked, what was the reason? Especially Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar was the big one with Babylon. And then, of course, it happened later, with Rome. But Rome wasn't described in the Bible. Obviously, it was written before that. But in either case, what was the reason? What was the reason that Yahweh gave in his word that he would have destruction come upon his people? It was for turning away from him. It was for abandoning his commandments, turning to other gods, idolatry. Okay, so why would it be any different now? You look at Jerusalem, it's a cesspool. They have one of the largest, if not the largest, gay pride parades over there. It's just a hodgepodge of different people from different monotheistic religions. It's a mess. It's a mess. They don't enforce Torah. They claim to be, Israel claims to be, at least to the masses, it claims to be like the Holy Land or whatever. But there's nothing holy about what goes on over there. It's a farce. Okay? The nation of Israel was established by decree by the United Nations. It was actually endorsed in 1948. Okay, that secular nation over there is not the fulfillment of prophecy. It's not the fulfillment of Yahweh calling back his people into the land. Yes, it's possible that there could be his people in the land in small numbers. There could be Jews over there. There could be people from the other tribes, maybe even some grafted in. But it's not the fulfillment of what the prophets were talking about. It's just not. So I think we need to get over this idea that like everything that goes on over there is just this great thing, because it's not. It's not. Okay? And Christian Zionists that just want to elevate Israel to this standpoint of, oh, they're always right, and the IDF is just great, and there's footage of the IDF over there committing war crimes basically. And not to say that the Palestinians don't do the same thing. It takes two to tango, but they're definitely not saints. They're controlled by a secular government. They have a form of religiosity. I think they do some religious stuff. They're allowed to keep the Sabbath, and they do some of the traditions and whatnot. But let's just put to rest that nation over there is a holy nation favored by Yahweh. I just don't see the fruit. I don't see the fruit. Now, if I saw a nation of righteousness over there, if I saw the nation as a whole repentant, turning back to Yahweh's actual commandments, and by that I don't mean the Mishnah and the Talmud, I mean his actual written commandments, then yes, I'd be on that bandwagon. But look at the fruit. It's not there. That fig tree it got rotten fruit. It just does. Okay? So, little rabbit trail there. But just all that to say, When we look at the three Gospels, Jerusalem, actually I said Jerusalem. It's not specifically Jerusalem. Jerusalem is in the immediate context, but the abomination is in the holy place where it should not be, and Jerusalem is surrounded by armies. Okay, that's basically what we're left with. The people just, I mean, if a siege is coming, you want to get out of the city. You don't want to be in that city when the siege is locked down. You want to get out. So it makes sense that he's telling him, those who are in the city, get out of the city, go to the mountains, and those who are out in the country, don't go in the city. These will be days of vengeance. It makes perfect sense. It's a city under siege. And I don't see that happening in any of these tribulation models that are put out there by the main guys and gals teaching this stuff. Okay, so this is just something I think we need to be aware of. I'm going to go back to Daniel, the book of Daniel, in two spots, because Yahshua said, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel. And I'm going to read, we don't have a ton of information about this. I'm going to just read what is explicit and then what is implied. And I'll start with the explicit. This is Daniel 11, verse. I'll start in 29. At the appointed time he will return and come into the south, but this last time it will not turn out the way it did before. For ships of Kittim will come against him. Therefore he will be disheartened and will return and become enraged at the holy covenant and take action. So he will come back and show regard for those who forsake the holy covenant. Forces from him will arise, desecrate the sanctuary fortress, and do away with the regular sacrifice. And they will set up the abomination that causes desolation. So this is what Yahshua was referring to. When you see this happen, then head to the mountains, get out of Jerusalem, because it's about to be surrounded by armies and about to be destroyed. Okay? The desolation is coming that was caused by the abomination of desolation, the abomination that caused desolation. So when we look at this, I don't know what to make of Daniel 11 as a whole. I've spent years trying to piece by piece take all these events, line them up with actual history. A lot of people claim to, but I've looked at charts, I've looked at histories, and I have not found. Sorry, my nose itches a lot. But I have found nothing that really lines up that I've seen, piece by piece, in a way that shows like a historical fulfillment of this all the way from Daniel's time or whenever it started. Now, if you're watching this and you have that information, feel free to send it to me, Facebook, however, and I'll look at it, because maybe it's there. I just haven't seen it, and I've looked for it for a long time. But in any case, I think the key thing here is when we zero in on the abomination, it says forces from him will arise. Now, what I just talked about earlier, one guy, the Antichrist, strolls into the temple and sets up the abomination of desolation. It's not what it says here. Forces from him arise. Then they desecrate the sanctuary fortress. Then they do away with the regular sacrifice. Then they set up the abomination that caused desolation. It's a sequence of events. So it's a group of people. It's a force that does this. They desecrate the sanctuary fortress, and this is one of those outside the box things. Let's think about this. Again, like in with Yahshua, with Matthew, he could have said temple, but he didn't. He said holy place. Same thing here. Daniel could have said temple, but he didn't. He said sanctuary fortress. Some translations say fortified sanctuary. So if we're thinking about this open-mindedly, any sanctuary that is fortified fits the bill potentially. So let's look around. We talked about earlier Fort Antonia, being where the Temple Mount is now. What's considered where the Dome of the Rock is. That's actually Fort Antonia. Well, it's a sanctuary. People consider it holy, and it's fortified. It's a fort. Kind of goes without reason, without saying. Okay. Other examples would be the actual Dome of the Rock sitting on top of there. It's a sanctuary to the Muslims, and it's fortified. You've got Israeli police there guarding the place. You've got Arabs in there ready to fight out of it at a moment's notice. They've done it before. They've gone in there with guns. They have teenagers sitting there throwing rocks and stuff. I mean, it's a fortified sanctuary. It's strengthened. It's strengthened against attack. That's all that means. You could look at the Vatican. It's a sanctuary. It's fortified. You're not getting in there with their security. You know, you've got, I mean, you've got a police force there that apparently is elite. You know, and the Italian army might even help out. I mean, so I mean, any place that is a sanctuary and is fortified in some way could potentially fit the bill here if we're being open-minded. Okay, so not just now the temple. Yes, the temple could. The temple could fulfill this if there was a temple, and if it was fortified against attack. Yes, possibly, but I don't think that's the only candidate. Now, um, they do away with the regular sacrifice. Now, this is what we've been told. This is what we've been told. Okay, you have this 7-year peace treaty. They build the temple. The Jews start doing the sacrifices, the regular sacrifices, the daily sacrifice that talks about in the Torah. You have 2 lambs a day, 1 in the morning, 1 late afternoon, every single day. That's the regular sacrifice. So all of a sudden, 3.5 years into this, he's like, you know, nope, I'm done. He goes in there, stops it, desecrates the sanctuary somehow, and declares himself to be God. Okay? When you look at this in the Hebrew, it doesn't say literally the regular sacrifice. You could take the word sacrifice off of there. It's implied, but literally it would say the regular. So if we're looking at it literally, he's doing away with something that has a regularity to it. Yes, it could be the regular sacrifices, but it could also be something as simple as, if we're looking at the Dome of the Rock as a possibility here, they go up there and pray regularly, right? If he puts a stop to that, maybe that's what we're looking at here. I don't know. And then he sets up the abomination that causes desolation. So the culmination of the sequence here is the abomination that causes desolation. So I don't really know what that is, but what triggered me to talk about this tonight, and I kind of mulled over doing it because I don't want to react to something in a knee-jerk kind of way, but it really got my attention. You know, if you've read my Facebook posts, if you've talked to me in person, you know my views on what the Jews are doing in Israel with this whole. I'm sorry, guys, my nose is just itching like crazy. I don't know why. Maybe the air is dry in here. I don't know, but what the Jews are doing over there, they clearly want to build a 3rd temple. They clearly want to do it. You've got proponents of the 3rd temple that are actively pushing it, that are running in the Knesset, and it looks like we might have enough in there to put Likud, you know, the right wing back in power, put Netanyahu back in power. And you know, there's video of him talking to Schneerson back in the day. You know, Schneerson says, you know, you have to do everything you can to bring the Messiah. He's like, I am, and he's like, well, no, you're not, because he's not here yet. And in their mind, it's up to the Jews. They have to do certain things. They have to get everything moving. They have to have a temple and all this kind of stuff in order for Mashiach to come. So in that mindset, yes, there is a drive to build the temple. Okay, so one possibility here is that let's say the Dome of the Rock is the sanctuary fortress. Okay, what if hypothetically they go to build this temple? You have to tear down the Dome of the Rock first, right? That would take forces to do. One guy is not just going to go in there and do that. So forces come in. They desecrate the sanctuary fortress, the Dome of the Rock. This is just a hypothetical, okay? They do away with the regular. They're banishing the Muslim presence from there, saying get off. Because what's been happening over the past few decades? The Muslims have had control, and they've told the Jews to stay away. The Jews cannot ascend the Temple Mount. They can't go up. Even though legally under Israeli law they can, the police force says, no, we don't want riots, we don't want trouble, just stay down, okay? So they go to the Western Wall. It's as close as they can get. If you kick the Muslims out and you destroy the Dome of the Rock, what's the next step here? Set up the abomination that causes desolation. Do we really think that the world is just going to sit by idly if the Jews do this and start to build their 3rd temple? Do we really think they're just going to be cool with it? I don't think so. I think that that would trigger war. I think that that would cause armies to potentially surround Jerusalem. So, in that line of thinking, the abomination that causes desolation could be the actual third temple itself, not just something that's done in the third temple 3.5 years into a 7-year peace treaty. Okay, so you got all these Christian Zionists that are totally on board. They're giving money, to the Temple Institute, to the Temple Mount Faithful, all these groups over there. They're voting for, they're pushing Israeli politicians who are trying to get this established, because to Christian Zionists, they have this idea: we have to have a temple for the Antichrist to come in and desecrate, for Jesus to come. So Jesus ain't coming without a temple. So let's hurry up and get temple built. That's Christian Zionism in a nutshell, right? I mean, let's just be honest with it. Let's be real. That's the goal of Christian Zionism. Because if you're a Christian, you don't believe that the law was nailed to the cross to you. So why are you so excited about the Jews reestablishing a sacrificial system that you think was nailed to the cross and you think nullifies the grace of God? Why? Because you want Jesus to come back, and your theology says that that temple has to be there first. So yeah, you're going to do what you can to help them build the temple. Okay, so but if that's the but in the first temples, you had a clear mandate from Yahweh to do it. With the tabernacle, he specifically commanded to build the tabernacle. Oh, sorry guys. Forgive me for my nose. I don't know what's going on. I feel like I'm being rude, but I can't help it. So you had the clear mandate for the tabernacle. You had a clear mandate for the temple. It was David's idea, but Yahweh endorsed it, and he blessed it. Okay. You had a clear mandate through the prophets to rebuild the temple, the second temple, after the Babylonian exile. You have Haggai. You have Zechariah talking about it. So there's a clear endorsement from Yahweh for those. Where's the endorsement from Yahweh from here? Where's the confirmed prophet coming on the scene saying Yahweh says to build a temple? There's not one. You have a bunch of Jewish, sages, rabbis that are saying it needs to be done. You got a bunch of Christian Zionists saying it needs to be done so Jesus can come, but you have no clear authority from Yahweh to do it. So you're playing with strange fire here if you do this. Okay? And talking about strange fire, back in, I think it was December, I think it was the last day of Hanukkah, I think, they had a dedication ceremony there in Jerusalem for the altar. They built an altar for this new temple, and they have like a little makeshift temporary one, and then they have like a larger one that's supposed to be the real thing. And they did a dedication for it. Now, when we read in Ezra and Nehemiah, we see that the first thing they did while they were building up the altars, the walls, was they built an altar, and they went ahead and started up the sacrifices. Okay, and the Jewish authorities who were getting all this moving, the Temple Institute and whatnot, have come out and said, yeah, we don't really need the whole temple to get started. All we need is an altar. Okay, then we can get started. Now they've got this whole thing with the red heifer. It's not scriptural, but in their theology, they have to have the ashes of the red heifer to purify the Temple Mount before they can start the temple, before they can start sacrifices. That includes the altar. Okay, so they're working on that now. And just a little bit ago, they did a mock red heifer burning. It wasn't a real red heifer, it was just a cow, just for like practice. Okay, and I know there was a lot of outrage. Oh, that poor animal, this is disgusting, da 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 da. But this is what they're doing, guys. They're practicing with intent. They want to do this. You don't practice how to burn a red heifer. You don't practice how to do sacrifices unless you have some inkling that it's actually going to happen. It's a waste of time and money, right? Okay, so they've got that going on. They dedicated this altar, and about these altars, okay, the portable one is smaller, and it's portable. A group of men can just, basically the moment they take the Temple Mount, they can have a crew haul this altar up there, set it up, in hours, maybe even less. It's portable. It's ready to go. The problem with this altar is that when we read in Exodus, okay, Yahweh says that when we build an altar, this is with the exception of the bronze altar he commanded for the tabernacle, for the Mishkan. When we build altars, they're supposed to be made out of earth, basically just a pile of dirt. Or if you're going to use stone, they have to be uncut stone. Okay, basically just natural stones that you find that haven't been cut by man, formed by man in any way. So what do? They build this altar, and as I understand it, it has a wood frame, some kind of wood frame, and they do these basically terracotta clay tiles that are laser cut because you can't use an iron tool, so they use lasers, and you gotta love those loopholes, right? So they're cut by lasers and basically just cover this altar, so it looks like something you might see out in somebody's backyard. It's this clay, this red clay altar, a little short altar with a ramp leading up to it. That's their portable one. Well, right there, that violates Yahweh's commandment about how to build an altar. So with their big altar, it's kind of the same thing, except it's obviously bigger. And it's made out of basically glorified concrete blocks. It's like a special concrete. I forget what type they call it. It's like a fancy, it's like a really fine, really high quality stuff. It's not the coarse cinder block look that you see, but it's like a really just nice, it's white, looks like limestone or something, maybe, I don't know. But that's what they made the bigger one out of, that they dedicated back in December. And this one's much bigger. It's taller than a man. You actually have to use the ramp to get up. The smaller one, you can just walk up, and I think it's like maybe waist or chest height. So you don't even really need to go up a ramp to get to it, but they built a ramp anyway. But for the big one, you need the ramp to get up there. But in any case, both of these altars violate Yahweh's commandment on how to build an altar. And we don't have a prophet like Moses who come along and says, "Thus says Yahweh, build the altar this way." We don't have that. So the way that they're doing these altars is unsanctioned. It's not of Yahweh. So if they go up to a holy place and they put one of these altars up, even if we don't have the temple yet, and they go up and put one of these altars and they start sacrifices on it, in my opinion, that's an abomination. Okay, that's an abomination to Yahweh. You're supposed to, these are supposed to be Levites, right? They're supposed to know his commandments. But what they've done is they've taken the commandments of their rabbis over the years, and they've used those in place of the actual written commandments by Yahweh in his holy word. So that's a candidate, in my opinion. And if they do it on the Temple Mount, Fort Antonia, that's a fortified sanctuary. It's a fort that has been made a sanctuary. Okay, and you'd have to take away the current. I guess that would have a double meaning because you've got the fort and the dome on top, and then you've got they would take away they take away the regular prayers of the Muslims there, which would fit technically, and then they would set up the abomination that caused desolation. So the other candidate here, and I kind of went on a slight rabbit trail there. It is connected, but when I mentioned earlier that I was triggered to talk about this, what really triggered me is the news announced that the Jews, the Sanhedrin, they've got this organization of 70 nations that they want to establish. And basically, in their theology, guys, I'm sorry for my nose. I'm just having trouble here. But they have this theology that says that the Torah, the commandments given at Mount Sinai through Moses, are only for the Jews. Okay? Everybody else, the Gentiles, the Goyim, they're forbidden to keep the commandments. They cannot keep the Torah. They're not Jews. They can't keep the Torah. They have to keep the 7 Noahide laws, which supposedly were given through Noah when he got off the ark. Okay? And they get the whole 70 nations things because when you look at the table of nations, it seems that there are 70 nations that were, offshoots of Noah's 3 children. Okay, so basically they want to establish this organization of the Gentiles and have them do the Noahide laws while they, the Jews, do the Torah, which is actually not the Torah. It's parts of the Torah with their Talmud and their Mishnah and their other writings, which are added to the Torah in violation of the Torah. So part of that is they're having this conference later this month, September 24th, I think, is when it starts. It's supposed to end the 27th, which is a Friday. Now, they put this announcement that on the last day of this, on the Friday, the 27th, they're going to go to the Mount of Olives. This is after they've met with the Knesset. They're going to go to the Mount of Olives and they're going to build an altar. And they're going to reinstitute the covenant of Noah. And they're basically going to dedicate the 70 nations, the Goyim, the Gentiles, to Hashem, to God, whatever, right? And bring them under the Noahide laws. Now, this is significant on a lot of levels, and this is why it really has my interest. And I'm hoping that my speculation on this proves to be wrong. I don't want to be wrong about this one. So I'm putting it out there just in case there's something to it, hoping the whole time that I'm wrong. But in any case, they're going to build this altar. It'll probably be just like the other ones, where it won't be authentic with Yahweh's his ordinations. It'll be an abomination, the altar itself, because it won't follow Yahweh's guidelines. And they're going to do a sacrifice there, and it's going to be on the Mount of Olives. And that's significant to me because the Mount of Olives, what did we just read? In the three Gospels, when Yahshua was talking to them about what's coming, he's on the Mount of Olives saying that. And I mentioned earlier that when we look at the holy place, when you see the abomination that caused desolation standing in the holy place where it should not. Now, I know I just put out the hypothesis that this could be like Fort Antonia, the Temple Mount, Dome of the Rock, all that stuff. This is now a separate hypothesis. If any place that Yahshua goes, because and I won't expound upon it here, but my current thought is that even though Yahshua is not the Father, like the Father, okay, he is still the Yahweh that dealt with Israel in the Old Testament. Okay, I won't get into that whole thing now, but that's where I'm going with this. So if that's true, then just like with the burning bush on Mount Sinai, really anywhere he goes could be considered holy ground, right? So we know that he spent a lot of time on the Mount of Olives. He practically lived there part-time when he was in Jerusalem. We know that the Mount of Olives is where he finally ascended back to heaven at the end of his 40 days after the resurrection. So it's a very significant place to him. It's of great importance to him. We know that from the book of Zechariah that when Yahweh returns, he's going to come down and stand on the Mount of Olives. He's going to fight for Jerusalem, it says, and his feet are going to split the mountain north and south with a crevice running east-west where people can escape. Okay? So there's a connection there. When we get into Ezekiel and we see Yahweh is giving, he's showing Ezekiel all the abominations that Israel is doing. And then he shows Ezekiel his glory departing from the temple. And it departs from off the ark, the Shekinah, whatever you want to call it. Technically, that's not in the Bible, but that's what people call the smoke, the actual glory of Yahweh that sits on the Ark of the Covenant. Gets up and leaves the temple. It goes out the eastern gate towards the east, and it says it lands on the mountain east of the temple. Well, the temple, was the city of David, which I believe that's the Mount of Olives. So if a place was made holy by virtue of Yahweh's glory being there, then that makes the Mount of Olives a candidate as a holy place. So if they do this whole on the Mount of Olives, this could be an abomination that causes desolation standing in the holy place where it ought not. And depending on how they do it, it could be enough to spark an outcry from the nations to cause them to attack Jerusalem in retaliation. I don't know, I'm speculating. But to get back into what I was mentioning earlier, the Noahide laws, if you're familiar with them, it's spelled out in the Talmud that these Noahide laws, I don't remember if all of them have a death penalty, but some of them do. I know for sure that blasphemy of the name has it, and I think that disrespecting the sages has it. So basically, one of the commandments is that you can't blaspheme the name. Okay. Well, of course, who's going to define what that means? They're going to define what that means. Okay. Right now, they teach that it's ineffable. You can't say it. When you go in the Old Testament and you look in the Hebrew, whenever God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, gives his name, it's spelled out as Yod He Wah He. You know, and the best I can tell, the way you pronounce it is Yahweh. I could be wrong. There are different variations on that. I'm not saying that they're wrong. Maybe they're right. Maybe we're all wrong. I don't know. But the focus is the Yod He Wah He, however we pronounce it. That's his name. The Jews have decreed, going all the way back to Yahshua's time, that you can't say that. It's too holy to be uttered by humans. We can't say it. In Yahshua's day, the only person that could say it was the high priest when he went in on Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur. He said it once. And it was like this big thing where all the people would bow, and it was just this big thing. So it had this huge importance to them, but they've forbidden it. Like nobody can say it. Okay. And so if I come along and I say the name of Yahweh, by their definition, I could be blaspheming the name of Yahweh. That's pretty huge, because and I'm connecting dots here as I go. When you hear Yahshua talk about the Elijah will return, before his coming and restore all things. What does Elijah mean? In the Hebrew, it's Eliyah. Yah, short form of Yahweh, is El, or God. That was his whole ministry. Elijah's whole ministry was to differentiate to the people the difference between Yahweh and Baal. Pick one. Like I said at Mount Carmel, you can't serve them both. Pick one. Just do it already. If you're going to go worship Baal, just do it. Just go full off into Baal worship and just go. But if you're going to worship Yahweh, commit to Yahweh full time, basically. Okay? So if that's the case, I think Yahweh's name is going to be important. And we do see a revival of interest in Yahweh's name, even among mainstream Christians are beginning to call Yahweh by his name, the best we can pronounce it. So the people are beginning to see the importance of it, at least from Christianity and its satellites. The Jews, maybe not so much. Okay. You do have Karaites like Nehemiah Gordon, who are advocates of pronouncing the name. I know Nehemiah used to say Yahweh, now he's saying Yehovah. I personally don't think that Yehovah is correct, but again, I could be wrong. I'm a fallible human. So in any case, with Eliyah, I think part of that is going to be critical. So this remnant that we have in these last days, the elect that Yahshua was talking about, that even the elect might be deceived. I really believe that they're going to be calling upon the name of Yahweh. I don't think it's going to be the Lord, God, Hashem, Adonai. No. They're going to go by his memorial name that he told Moses was his memorial name through all generations. All generations means all generations, not some. It means all. So that includes us, right? Just thinking logically here. Okay, so that's one of the aspects. And then disrespecting the sages, not heeding them, not obeying their edicts or whatever. Sages is the rabbis, basically. So basically, part of the Noahide laws is that you're supposed to obey the Jewish authorities. So even though even though you are not a Jew and you don't have to keep the Torah, you're forbidden to keep the Torah. Actually, you're just limited to these 7 Noahides. You still have to do what the Jewish authorities say, and if you don't, the penalty is death. And I believe it's death by beheading. Okay, I could be wrong, but I think I read that. So in any case, this is concerning because for someone who like me, who is making an effort to keep Yahweh's holy commandments, and who is an advocate of actually referring to him by his name, and who will never submit to this Sanhedrin. I will never submit. I will never bring my family under their headship. I won't. It's a false authority. It's not from Yahweh. And I don't care if it, I don't care how wise their rabbis are. I don't care if it is in the land of Israel. I don't care if they are Jewish, the chosen people, whatever you want to call it. I'm not bringing my family under that authority. I have one authority, and it's Yahshua the Messiah. And it's up to his Father, Yahweh the Almighty. That's my authority. So by that, just by having that belief and making those statements, I stand condemned according to the Noahide laws. So, it's related. It's kind of a slight rabbit trail, but it's that whole organization of 70 nations thing. So like that's what they're trying to do. So those are two candidates in my mind for the abomination that caused desolation that are not mainstream. There's others. If you think about, I don't know what it would look like, but if you look at, I mentioned earlier the plains of Jericho, that's identified as a holy place. When Joshua talked to the angel, he said, "Take your shoes off, you're on holy ground." Well, that's a holy place then, right? So that one's more of a reach because I don't see any evidence of any type of regular sacrifice being there to take away. It is a holy place. That's about it. Unless something develops, it's kind of a weak one, but I still think it should be on our radar. Okay. And I haven't gotten there yet, but let me go back to Daniel and the 8th chapter, starting in verse 9. Now, this section here, people generally believe to be talking about the abomination of desolation, and I think it's because of the connection to the regular sacrifice that we read about back in Daniel chapter 11. Out of one of them came forth a rather small horn, which grew exceedingly great toward the south, towards the east, and towards the beautiful land. This is generally accepted to be the Antichrist. It grew up to the host of heaven and caused some of the host and some of the stars to fall to the earth, and it trampled them down. It even magnified itself to be equal with the commander of the host, and it removed the regular sacrifice from him, and the place of his sanctuary was thrown down. And on account of transgression, the host will be given over to the horn, along with the regular sacrifice, and it will fling truth to the ground and perform its will and prosper. Okay, then I heard a holy one speaking, and another holy one said to that particular one who was speaking, "How long will the vision about the regular sacrifice apply, while the transgression causes horror, so as to allow both the holy place and the host to be trampled?" He said to me, "For 2,300 evenings and mornings, then the holy place will be properly restored." Okay, so this is generally accepted to be talking about the abomination because you've got the holy place, the regular sacrifices, the Antichrist, all that stuff is there connected. And the problem is it never actually comes out and really says any of that. It's people are connecting dots, and that's okay, but it doesn't come out and really, in my mind, say it clearly enough to make that connection. The regular sacrifice being taken away from him. This is from the commander of the host, presumably that's Joshua. And the place of his sanctuary was thrown down. That's supposedly the third temple, but the third temple is not going to be his sanctuary. It's just not. Now, if they build this third temple, it will be a sanctuary, but it's not going to be Yahshua's. It's not going to be Yahweh's. So to call that the place of his sanctuary, it's I just don't see it. I don't see this as being a direct apples to apples correlation with the abomination that caused desolation. I just don't see it. The next time it mentions something that people consider to be the abomination is in Daniel chapter 9. This is in the 70 weeks. I'll start off in verse 26. Now, when we read this, it's really difficult because there's a ton of pronouns. There's lots of he's, and the way the sentences are structured, it's ambiguous as to which subject the pronouns are referring back to. And I'll try to highlight that as I read it here. Then after the 62 weeks, the Messiah, the anointed one, will be cut off and have nothing. And the people of the prince who is to come will destroy the city and the sanctuary. So we've got two people mentioned here, Messiah and the prince to come. Okay? Now, and its end will come with a flood. Even to the end there will be war. Desolations are determined. Desolations, there we go. And he doesn't say which one it just talked about. It could be the Messiah or the prince. It's not clear from the grammar. Will make a firm covenant with the many for 1 week, but in the middle of the week he will put a stop to sacrifice and grain offering. And on the wing of abominations will come one who makes desolate, even until a complete destruction. One that is decreed is poured out on the one who makes desolate. So I get it. I see why people connect this, because it's talking about abominations, it's talking about desolations, it's talking about the sanctuary, it's talking about the sacrifices. All those elements are here. But let's break this down. The prince who is to come will destroy the city and the sanctuary. Now, we're assuming that this city is Jerusalem, okay? So the prince of the people who's to come will destroy Jerusalem. That's the first thing that happens here, okay? Now, its end will come with a flood. Even the end there will be war. Desolations are determined. So the prince that's to come will destroy the city, presumably Jerusalem. Then you've got wars until the end. We still don't know who he is. It could be the last subject that it talked about, which would be the prince. It's still vague to me. Will make a firm covenant, and literally that can be confirms the covenant or strengthens an existing covenant, which I think is key. With the many for 1 week, but in the middle of the week he'll put a stop to sacrifice and grain offering. Now, this is where we get this whole idea of the Antichrist comes in. The week is 7 years. He comes in the middle of the week, 3.5 years in. He puts a stop to the sacrifices. He says, no more sacrifices, we're done. And then he sets up the abomination, etc., etc., okay? But let's break this down. And I've brought this up before, but I'll go into it again here. He will make a firm covenant. This is 27. He will actually confirm or strengthen a covenant with the many for 1 week. Okay. Now I'm going to take us back. Let's look at context here. Daniel chapter 9. What is going on here? Daniel has been praying for understanding of what Jeremiah was talking about with the 70 weeks or the 70 years, right? He wanted to know when that was going to end and the exile was going to be over. He was praying for understanding. But at the same time, he was confessing the sins of the people. Okay. Now I'm going to go back to the beginning of the chapter, and I'm going to read, in the first year of Darius, the son of Ahasuerus, of Median descent, who was made king over the kingdom of the Chaldeans, in the first year of his reign, I, Daniel, observed in the books the number of the years which was revealed as the word of Yahweh to Jeremiah the prophet for the completion of the desolations of Jerusalem. Okay, so we're talking about the desolations of Jerusalem. How long is it going to take for this to be done? That's his question. Okay, namely 70 years. So I gave my attention to Yahweh Elohim to seek him by prayer and supplications with fasting, sackcloth, and ashes. I prayed to Yahweh my Elohim and confessed and said, Alas, O Yahweh, the great and awesome Elohim, who keeps his covenant and loving kindness for those who love him and keep his commandments, we have sinned, committed iniquity, acted wickedly, and rebelled, even turning aside from your commandments and ordinances. Moreover, we have not listened to your servants, the prophets, who spoke in your name to our kings, our princes, our fathers, and all the people of the land. Righteousness belongs to you, O Yahweh, but to us open shame, as it is to this day, to the men of Judah, the inhabitants of Jerusalem, and all Israel, those who are nearby and those who are far away, in all the countries to which you have driven them, because of their unfaithful deeds which they have committed against you. Open shame belongs to us, O Yahweh, to our kings, our princes, and to our fathers, because we have sinned against you. To Yahweh our Elohim belongs compassion and forgiveness, for we have rebelled against him. Nor have we obeyed the voice of Yahweh our Elohim to walk in his teachings, which he set before us through his servants the prophets. Indeed, all Israel has transgressed your law and turned aside, not obeying your voice. So the curse has been poured out on us. So if you go back and read the Torah, especially in Deuteronomy, but talks about it elsewhere, there's blessings and curses for obedience. Some of them are personal, most of them are national, towards all people. So he's saying, all these curses come upon us, like you said they would, because we as a people forsook you and didn't keep your commandments. That's what he's saying here. Along with the oath which is written in the Torah of Moses, the servant of Elohim, for we have sinned against him. Thus he has confirmed his words, which he spoke against us and against our rulers who ruled us, to bring on us great calamity. He was talking about the covenant here earlier. Okay, so what words is he confirming? I think it's the covenant. I think the context makes it clear that he's confirming what's in that covenant, which is the curses, for disobedience and etc. To bring us great calamity, for under the whole heaven there has not been done anything like what has been done to Jerusalem. As it is written in the law of Moses, all this calamity has come on us, yet we have not sought the favor of Yahweh our Elohim by turning from our iniquity and giving attention to your truth. Therefore Yahweh has kept the calamity in store and brought it on us, for Yahweh our Elohim is righteous with respect to all his deeds which he has done, but we have not obeyed his voice. Okay, so we have a clear. I'm sorry, guys. I've got to blow my nose. I'll be right back. Sorry about that. I just couldn't take it anymore. I'll see if I can edit that out of the playback. But for you guys who are watching it live, I apologize. I'm just having a tough time here. I don't know if it's allergies or what, but bear with me. I know it's probably painful to watch. So anyway, in the context here, Daniel's basically saying, we knew your Torah, we had it, we knew your commandments, we knew the blessings, we knew the curses, and yet we as a people rebelled against you. We chose not to keep your commandments. And because of that, you confirmed that you followed through and did what you said you were going to do by bringing all this calamity on us, all this destruction. So, like I ask people sometimes, like if Yahweh, if a man makes a covenant, we're all weak, fallible flesh. We break our promises all the time. If Yahweh himself makes a covenant and breaks his promises, how reliable is he? What's our basis of faith? Why would we trust him to do anything for us if he's gonna not keep his promises? So he's following through with the covenant. He's confirming the covenant. Okay, and so I think it's possible that when we get later in there, because he says this prayer, and then Yahweh sends Gabriel to him to explain to him. And he gives him the whole vision of the 70 weeks and explains, that this whole thing, that we get this whole theology of, the Antichrist, and, this whole left behind scenario is kind of played in there and whatnot, like I just talked about. But I think it's possible that in verse 27, if it refers back to the Messiah, will make a firm covenant, will confirm the covenant with many for 1 week, but in the middle, he'll put a stop to sacrifice and grain offering. Now, I mentioned that this was going to be outside the box. Okay, so for most of these general interpretations, I'm presenting a possible alternative. And I want to make it clear that in all of this, I'm not saying that Yahweh has told me any of this. I don't have direct revelation from the source. I'm just speculating, I'm interpreting, I'm trying to be a Berean about this, and I'm trying to present possibilities that we should maybe be mindful of, like I said earlier, so we don't miss the boat when it actually happens, because we're looking over here at this hand when the action is really over here at this hand, basically, right? Okay, so in the middle of the week, he'll put a stop to sacrifice and grain offering. Now, that's obviously the Antichrist coming into the temple and saying, cut it out, guys, we're not doing the sacrifice anymore, right? That's the obvious, right? But if everybody is looking for that, if everybody believes that's going to happen, how is this deception going to be so complete? That's my question. I've always thought that if you look at a theory on the end times and how it's going to go down, the popular prevailing views are not going to happen, because nobody's going to be deceived, right? You see it coming. You're ready for it. So it's got to be something that catches people off guard, that comes in out of left field, and that they're not looking for. Okay, so let's take a look at that language. He'll put a stop to sacrifice and grain offering. We're going to go to the book of Joel. And we're not going to read the typical stuff in Joel, that we read about the day of Yahweh. We're going to read something different. I'm going to read, now keep in mind, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but if you start off at the beginning, the context is Yahweh is sending a destruction on the land, specifically famine. Okay, that's the whole context here. We get into verse 13 of chapter 1. Gird yourselves with sackcloth and lament, O priests. Wail, O ministers of the altar. So he's talking to the priests here. Okay, ministers of the altar. Ministers of the altar, what's their job? Their job is to actually offer the sacrifices, right? Come spend the night in sackcloth, O ministers of my Elohim, for the grain offering and the drink offering are withheld from the house of your Elohim. Is it a man withholding this? No, it's Yahweh himself with famine. Okay? I mean, in the temple, you had grain offerings, you had libation offerings, which was wine. You had the different burnt offerings, which were different various animals. You had cows, you had sheep, you had goats, rams, turtle doves. Okay, if you have a famine, and let's say you have no grain, you have no crop. Well, what do you want to sacrifice? Let's say you have no grapes. Where's your wine? If your pastures are drying up, your livestock's going to die off. So if the famine gets severe enough, the sacrifices will be cut off because you will have nothing to sacrifice. And given that Yahweh, I can't even begin to get into it in this study because it's so extensive, but when you read through the prophets, he makes it clear that famine is going to be one of the big judgments that comes on the world and his people in the last days. It's one of the four horsemen of the apocalypse in Revelations, famine. And Yahweh judges his people by sword, which is war, by famine, by pestilence, and with captivity. Those are his four main modes of judgment on his own people and also the nations. So I think it's possible that in Daniel, where it talks about the sacrifices being cut off, it could be just as a result of famine. So we could be looking for, this one guy to stroll in there and say, cut it out, no more sacrifices, and what if that never happens? What if we're waiting for that to happen and it never happens? Then who's going to believe that the end is actually coming? Nobody's going to, believe it, right? And so I realized that I just kind of threw a lot out there, and it's kind of, like I said, I had no notes going into this. I just felt like I had to get this out, basically, while it was fresh in my mind. And I might do a stream or something later where I kind of try to like rein it in more and kind of go more organized. But this was just kind of a free thought kind of exercise, just kind of going through and connecting some dots. Hopefully it made sense. I don't think I'll go much longer. I'll try to wrap it up now here. I was trying to keep this under an hour, and I've managed to go almost an hour and a half. I don't know how that happens. Anyway, so just putting that out there, just stuff to watch for. When this stuff comes up later this month, I'm keeping an eye on it, hoping that I'm wrong, hoping that nothing happens. I will note that in the announcement, when they first did it for this sacrifice coming up, they said it was going to be on Friday the 27th. There have been people reporting online that they actually reached out and asked them to confirm the date, and they said that they changed it to the 26th. So I'm watching both dates. I'm not sure what's going on there, but part of me wonders if, they're telling the world they're going to do the 27th to have everybody because there are going to be people there who are going to protest and whatnot. Especially when you consider the Mount of Olives has kind of been contested territory. So if people are looking for the 27th, they actually sneak in there a day early when people aren't ready and do it there. I mean, that's possible. I don't know. And so far, the only nations that have actually signed on to this are Mexico, Guatemala, Salvador, Trinidad, Tobago. There's 7. I forget. 7 Caribbean, Central American, South American nations. There haven't been any European nations or North American or anybody else that I know of. So anyway, that's just kind of just a brief overview of stuff I think we should look for. I guess what I want to leave you with here is basically whatever, like I said, whatever everybody's talking about, whatever everybody's looking for, I'm looking the other way. I'm not looking at that. I don't see that happening, because what does Yahshua say? If you know the thief is coming, you're going to stay and watch. You're not going to let him in. So how's everybody going to be surprised if we see the thief coming? If it just doesn't make any sense. And that's why, not to, I don't want to go off on too much of a different thing, but like, people have been calculating the number of the beast for ages. The 666, trying to figure out who it is, because if we can just pin down who the guy is, then we'll have it all figured out. And everybody, like Nero, Ronald Reagan, Obama, I mean, you could do it for anybody, so I just, and I've mentioned my views on what the mark of the beast is. I'm not going to get into it here. The number of the beast, actually, well, both the mark and the number. But in any case, I just really think that we just have to be on guard. We have to really be open-minded, and I think that if we're not watching for stuff happening around the periphery, we're going to get sucker punched, and we're not going to see it coming. And we're supposed to watch. He says, watch, and I don't know what else I can say. I can't top that. That's the words of Messiah. So I'm just going to leave it at that and call it a night. And I'm tired. I'm ready to go to bed. But again, I hope everyone has a nice Sabbath. And if you have any questions about any of this, feel free to message me on Facebook, talk to me in person. I know a lot of the views I present are not mainstream, and some are even controversial. So I just ask you that if I say something that you don't understand, or that might even offend you in some way, please don't just drop it and let it go. Please talk to me. Give me a chance to explain it. Give me a chance to hopefully expound on it in a way that makes more sense if it's not clear, to explain my position, if we have a disagreement of opinion, we can talk it out, because people have heard things I said in passing and just let it go, and then I find out months later that it was this undercurrent thing the whole time. And I'd be happy to talk about it right from the get-go. So just anything I say, this is just blanket. Anything I say, if it strikes you as something that's like, yeah, that sounds kind of off, talk to me about it. I mean, reach out to me, talk to me. I'm glad to talk about it. If I say something in passing, or even if I say something firmly, I'm open to being wrong. I've been wrong before on lots of stuff, so I mean, maybe I'm wrong about some of the stuff I'm saying now, and I realize with this one I'm speculating, but other stuff I've said on other videos I have said more firmly. Talk to me about it. Talk to me about it. I'm happy to discuss it, and hopefully iron sharpens iron. Hopefully we can all be friends, and hopefully brothers and sisters in Messiah, and not let open questions about stuff, taint any of that. So with all that, good night. Hope you have a good Sabbath, and Yahweh bless you.